Welcome to In All Honesty, the podcast where we get real about life and all the problems that come with it. I'm Michelle Elman, and I'm that friend who we all know is a little bit too honest. You might not come to me when you get back together with your ex, but I'll be there for you when it all goes tits up. Welcome back to In All Honesty, our Valentine's Day special. And as most of you know, I adore Valentine's Day, and yet I have no plans because actually my love for Valentine's Day is not about what I actually do on the day. And I'll get into that story later. But for right now, I wanted to give you a little bit of an update of my love life because January was a busy month. So I've started looking at my life as a bunch of levers. And that if you look at the pie of life, we have social life, we have friends, we have family, we have dating, we have work, we have health and fitness. And I would say for the month of January, dating was at a 10 out of 10, health and fitness was at a 9 out of 10, work was a solid 7 out of 10, which kind of didn't leave a lot of time for my family and friends. But then in my month of February, I brought dating all the way down to a 0. And I am prioritizing family because my family are in the country and it's been Chinese New Year. I'm prioritizing friends, and my work has gone up to a 10 out of 10 just because it's a really busy month. And we only have so many hours in the day, time and energy. And I think often I'm asked, how do you do it all? And it's not about doing it all. It's about prioritizing. So certain months I prioritize dating and certain months I don't. January, I prioritize dating. And my current stats on dating are, I had 17 first dates planned. I ended up on 8 first dates and I ended up on 2 second dates. And I had so much fun in the month of January. I met some incredible people. I had some amazing experiences. I also had 2 or 3 really rough moments of rejection, from being stood up to being unmatched 45 minutes before, to the final thing that put the nail in the coffin of being on a second date and him telling me that he'd been on a first date 2 days before our first date and that he was going for dinner with her on a second date the day after our second date, and that it wasn't authentic to keep dating because he was more interested in her, which I'm not a very jealous person, but was a very honest way of letting me down. And I think because we'd had a number of conversations leading up to that, there was more expectation, largely around things like we just were so compatible in like really weird, unique ways. So like paddleboarding and squash are not the most popular sports. For someone to be into both, and this had happened like just moments before the rejection had happened, and we ended up deciding to continue a drink, and we stayed out till like 11 o'clock anyway. But it was just like the final string of things in a week that I went like, whew, okay, that hurt a little. I need to take a break. I need to put a pin on it. And when I say I take a break, I don't know how long this break is going to last. I'm predicting something like 2 weeks. I just need to catch myself. Because I think if you feel very vulnerable from rejection, first of all, I need to take the time to process that rejection. I need to feel it. It's hit on wounds from rejections of the past. So it's not necessarily about him. And I actually said that to his face. He said to me like, oh, you're responding really well. And I said to him, out of curiosity, why did you decide to be so honest? And he said, you're an author. And I was like, what does that mean? And he was like, you've published 5 books. And I was like, there are a lot of people who've published books and the books are full of shit. So what does that mean? And he was like, your whole thing is honesty. I just thought I would go for the honest approach and I thought you would appreciate that. And I did. And I had a huge respect for him. To be able to call it off in the middle of us literally kissing took a lot of authenticity to yourself, to honor yourself in that moment. And I did have a huge amount of respect. And also I had my own feelings of hurt. And I just said to him, look, I'm not a very good person at hiding emotions on my face. And you might be seeing that I'm quite hurt. And as I paused to say the word hurt, he said, it's okay, you can be angry, you can hit me. And I was like, I'm not angry, I don't want to hit you. I'm just a little hurt and a little disappointed. And I'll be honest that it's off the back of 2 rejections this week already, where I got stood up and unmatched 45 minutes before the date. And so it's just a one too many kicks. We had a really lovely conversation about it. And I was like, okay, so just clarifying, because I was cuddling into his arms at that point. I was like, just to clarify boundaries, like, because you're interested in this other woman, like, are we? And he was like, no, we can keep cuddling. And I was like, no, actually, I think for me, like, I just need a bit more space. So I like sat away from him, moved to the other side of the table. And then I was like, okay, so should we get the bill? And he was like, no, let's carry, like, I really enjoy your company and I'd really like to be friends. We started talking about spirituality and he made a joke about being my spiritual friend. And I made a joke about being his paddleboarding and squash friend because he said his dream was to go down the Thames. And I was like, I would love to do that. But I think I had already been getting messages that I wanted to slow down. I think when I got unmatched 45 minutes before, I had made the decision to stop swiping. And then when I got stood up, I had already made the decision of like, okay, I'm just going to play out all the dates I already have booked and see what happens with these guys, but I'm not swiping anymore. And I do think I'm just going to take a break for 2 weeks, mostly for the month of February, focus on work, get through this busy period, and then when I have more time, I'll return to it. But the words I've been using this month is like, I just need the dust to settle. Having so many experiences and so many dates back to back, it was almost like I didn't really have time to digest my learnings from it, how I felt about it, why there was one guy I was more interested in and why there was one guy I was less interested in. There were a few experiences where I was like, God, I want to be your friend, but why don't I want something more? And I couldn't really unpick that. And I do think you kind of just need to take a moment to take a breather and let all of the experiences you've had almost digest. So that is the experiences I've been coming into Valentine's Day with. I have had some really lovely Valentine's Days single. I've had some really lovely Valentine's Days in a relationship. And equally, I've had some really rubbish Valentine's Day, both single and both in a relationship. So I don't believe the two are correlated. And I think so often we see Valentine's Day as a holiday or a celebration for coupled people that we assume the negative Valentine's Days must be the single ones. And the positive Valentine's Days is when you have a partner who is celebrating you and giving you gifts and all that kind of stuff. But Valentine's Day is just not about that for me. So I was a late bloomer. And so Valentine's Day was always a day that was quite hard. I remember my first year of university, us jokingly, but I guess it wasn't really a joke because we did end up doing it, watching Bridget Jones with a tub of Ben and Jerry's and ordering Domino's and sat there and just feeling sorry for ourselves. I remember one of my friends that year went out on a date and us both being like, oh, I wish I was asked out for Valentine's Day. Realistically, being more than 10 years on, being asked out on a first date on Valentine's Day is a lot of pressure that I'm not sure I would do a first date on Valentine's Day unless it was under the idea of like, it's just any other date. I do think also to put a lot of pressure in the early stages of dating, so that second date onwards before you're official, is almost like a weird test that feels quite immature, because then you're making Valentine's Day this make it or break it, and no wonder you hate Valentine's Day for this reason. So that was my Valentine's Day in first year. And then in second year of university, so I'm 19 years old, on the lead up to it, I was in hospital for 6 weeks for an obstructed bowel. And one of my best friend's birthday is on the 11th of February. And to not be graphic, essentially, I didn't know when I was getting out of hospital. And I was just willing my body to start working again before my friend's birthday. So I really wanted to come back for February 11th. And my body just magically started working on like February 9th. And I went straight out of hospital, flew back to London. I wasn't listening to doctor's offers. I was getting back to university. I had missed my friends so much, but also I had such an intrinsic fear of being away from my friends that I would be losing all my friends, that I wanted to get back in a hurry. And so I arrived, and I remember the day I arrived, one of my friends was like, God, this week is so busy. And I was like, why? What's going on? They were like, oh, well, best friend's birthday and then Valentine's Day. And I was like, that's only 2 things. And it's because they had planned a surprise party, but she only realized once she started saying the sentence. And basically between my best friend's birthday and Valentine's Day on the 13th, they had thrown me a surprise welcome home party. Not only was all my uni friends there, everyone I knew in university, but all my school friends had come up to Bristol. And I was just so overwhelmed with love that day. Bear in mind, I've just spent the last 6 weeks worrying I was losing my friends, knowing that every time I've gone into hospital, my experience has been you have friends, you go into hospital, you come out, people think you've died and that you have no friends left, and then you have to start making friends again. That I had finally found this friendship group in university, and every day I spent in hospital, which is why I literally flew with my stitches having not even come out, like I was back at university, clutching onto my stomach to even be able to walk into university. That's how desperate I was to get back. And then them not only being like, hey, don't worry, we didn't forget about you, but like, we want to celebrate you being alive. We want to celebrate you being back. It was just honestly one of my favorite memories in my lifetime, but also just healing. It was so healing to be like, oh, people love me, they care about me, you're not forgettable. And you actually do have enough impact on the people in your life. They will be there for you when shit hits the fan. And this might be just the difference in age. Like at 11 years old, out of sight equals out of mind. When you're 19 years old and your friend goes into hospital, you have enough maturity to be like, are you okay? How can we help you? And my friends had always been amazing around my medical stuff. Like even in freshers, I remember the number of times I would have a headache and they would like send me to bed with a chocolate bar and a bottle of water and then pick me up on the night out. So the only thing I would miss was the free drink. So I could still join in. And all my medical stuff was never made a big deal. And it was just so healing for like basically being treated the opposite way in school. And so that was the 13th of February. And then 14th of February, we were again doing this whole thing about being miserable and like people moaning about it. And I was like, are we actually going to spend 24 hours being sad and talking about how we don't have any love in our life when literally I have experienced this overwhelming amount of love, platonic love from my friends the day before? So I went down to the kitchen on Valentine's Day and I was like, I'm banning all moaning and I've just come out of hospital, so I get what I want today. I remember we were walking to uni and I was like, do you know how lucky we are to be able to use our legs and walk? Like this is the euphoria that comes out of leaving hospital. Like I call it being a bit like a newborn, like you're so amazed by the world around you, like being able to be around your friends, that's something you probably take for granted, being able to walk that you probably take for granted. All of these things were like new to me and things I was actively grateful for. And like I was hobbling on the way to uni and I remember I went like sometimes we just need to stop and smell the roses, and I flung my hand out at like our neighbor's garden and one of my friends goes, Michelle, those are weeds. And I was like, yes, and they're beautiful weeds. But I had set this policy and I was like, you all have to entertain me because I've just come out of hospital. I set this policy of we weren't going to complain. And what I did was I organized a quadruple date with 4 guys in our corridor, the 4 girls of us who were single, and we all went on this night out. And while I was in hospital, I had a huge crush on this guy. It was the first guy I properly ever liked, and we were going to go on a first proper date, which sounds a bit strange, but like in university, you never really went on dates. So you could be seeing a guy for months. And I'd been seeing this guy for like 3 months. He'd said he'd loved me, but we'd never been on a proper date. And we were going on our first proper date. And then I ended up in hospital 2 days before. I hadn't seen him since and not heard anything from him the whole 6 weeks I was in hospital. The only interaction, I still remember this, the only interaction I'd had from him was my dad was trying to move my IV drip and had said something like, oh, should I pull the plug? And I made a joke about like, you shouldn't make that joke to someone lying in a hospital bed. And I'd put it as a Facebook status and he'd liked it. And I remember how cutting it was that he'd not asked if I was okay, not checked in on me, knew from all my friends I was in hospital quite seriously and severely. And yet the only interaction you had with me in 6 weeks was liking a status about me dying. And because that Valentine's Day was a Thursday, we always went to the same club on a Thursday. And I knew he would be there. So we went on this quadruple date. We had the most amazing time. And I walk into this club and I see him there. And the first thing he says to me is like, I hate Valentine's Day. Anyone who I like never likes me back. I asked out a bunch of girls and they all turned me down. And I literally was like, I've just come out of hospital. Are we just going to pretend like, one, that's not happened? Two, that the last time I saw you, you literally told me I love you and I laughed in your face because I was like, we've not even gone on a date yet. And then three, the next thing he said was, oh, you've lost so much weight. And I was like, I just nearly died. I have not eaten food in 6 weeks. I was literally what they call nil by mouth. In order to be this thin, I have had nothing enter my mouth for 6 weeks. And I just got so upset. And I remember I found one of my friends who had been on this quadruple date with us. And he was like, what's wrong? And I told him what happened. And then I was like, you know what? No, screw this. He is not going to ruin my Valentine's Day. I've had the most incredible day, surrounded by the most incredible people, my friends who I love so, so much. You just don't get that power. You don't get to take that away. And I think there was this moment where, because the guy I was talking to was much older, my friend, he was much older than us. We started having this conversation around, he was talking to me about my choice in men and was telling me like, you don't deserve to be treated like that and you don't deserve to be spoken to like that. It was this moment of how often I have neglected the love of my friends, the platonic love in my life, and felt like I've been unlovable because of the men in my life, and basically ignoring the love that already existed in my world just because we put romantic love on a pedestal, just because I hadn't been in a relationship, just because the guy I liked didn't like me back, just because the guy I liked literally was insulting me to my face. Like, I remember how hurtful it was, him saying all the girls I like never like me back. And I was like, what am I then? And it just became, this Valentine's Day became a celebration of being alive, of being around my friends, of just honestly getting to be around people who valued me and appreciated me and wanted to celebrate me, and focusing on that, and that being an active choice. And I remember the next morning we woke up and all my friends were like, hey, you know, your policy of not allowing us to complain about Valentine's Day actually worked. I think that might have been the best Valentine's Day I've ever had. And so it's become this running a joke around my friendship group that on Valentine's Day I usually wake up to the most texts I've ever get, more than my birthday. And I've had friends who are in long-term relationships saying, what does it say that I remember to text you on Valentine's Day more than I do my partner of 9 years? And I just think what it says is amazing things. It says amazing things about prioritizing platonic relationships. Obviously, it's everything that I'm preaching in Bad Friend, talking about friendship breakups, yes, but friendship breakups so we can have the best friendships in our life. And I think that's what Valentine's Day has always stood out for me. And then if I go into like the first few years where I lived in London, the tradition between me and my best friend, who was my housemate at the time, was we bought silly gifts, usually from Sainsbury's, of like, I remember there was like a dancing heart she bought me one year. I have a mug that says like, my heart is with you always. Like, the cheesiest, the naffest presents, the better. And that was our little tradition. But it was just that Valentine's Day has always been about that. And it's not about the capitalist element of it. It's the fact that we should have a day where we celebrate love. And it's not to say you shouldn't do these lovely romantic gestures every other day of the year. It's the fact that so often we prioritize the people who we're complaining about, who we're bitching about, who we're moaning about. And like, actually, when's the last time you've bothered to send a friend a text and just be like, hey, I really appreciate you, I really respect you, and saying those things? If Valentine's Day is a good excuse to do it, then do it. So as much as I hate Christmas, this is my campaign to get you to love Valentine's Day. And I have a plan for you this Valentine's Day to really change your outlook on it, how to prioritize yourself this Valentine's Day. But just before we get to that, time for listeners' messages.
Hi Michelle, my name's Susanna, and first of all I just want to say I'm a big fan of the podcast and all your social media stuff. Discovered you after a pretty rough breakup last year. My question is that after that breakup I had started getting on the dating apps for the first time. I'm only 22 and I was with my partner for 3 years, so I'd never really done online dating before. And I found that I will match with someone And once they start showing interest in me or wanting to plan on a date, I kind of maybe lose interest, or I'm like, why did I match with them in the first place? I don't find them as attractive or intriguing as I did clearly when I decided to swipe on their profile. So I'm wondering if you have any ideas about what's going on and how I can work on getting past that, because I feel like I'm shutting myself out of some good opportunities. Thanks.
Thank you so much for that. The main thing I would say to you is you are allowed to not feel excitement about meeting a stranger. Like, talking to a stranger on an app and sending messages back and forth isn't meant to be a process that gets you invested or attached, because essentially you don't know the person yet. And so I would even say all the way up to the first date, like, it is normal and healthy for you to not feel a level of excitement getting on the tube, maybe even feeling a sense of dread as you're getting ready for the date. The difference is, once you're on the date, you should be feeling something different. It's about setting that benchmark of actually meeting the person. And this is why I encourage you to get off the apps as soon as possible. And one of the interesting experiences I had in late December with one of the guys I was dating, he dated a lot. He was someone who wasn't into monogamy. And he said that even if he was in a long-term relationship, he would still be dating casually. And he said something in passing. He was about 10 years older than me, and he said he'd been on probably about 5,000 dates in his life. And he then went on to say, when you go on this many dates, your bar of expectation is so low. And the reason why he'd said this to me is because he was like, oh, I wasn't even expecting you turning up. And I was like, what? Why would you not expect me to turn up? And he was like, when you've been on 5,000 dates, you have seen everything. You have seen people unmatched. People have walked up to you, walked past you, like not turned up on the day, completely changed their mind once they've met you. I have been through it all. And so now when I go on a date, I have zero expectations, and whatever happens, happens, and I'm open-minded around it. And whilst I can't say I'll want to go on 5,000 dates, it was a really great learning, because I was like, actually, having zero expectations means it can only go up. And I understand it's easier to say than do, because as humans, we do build expectation. But then on the flip side, the fact that you don't have any excitement, or like you're getting bored talking on the apps. Yeah, I mean, texting is not the most riveting thing at the best of times. There are times when I'm texting my friends and I'm like, oh, I want to touch base. I want to properly connect. But texting is not one of those ways I feel a level of connection. And so what I will say is, be less selective on the apps, be more selective in person. When I was talking to him about this, I also asked, do you find there's any correlation between the conversations you have on the app and the conversations you have in person? I was like, when you have such a volume of experiences, that actually is quite an interesting research study. And maybe this is the psychology nerd in my brain. But I was like, to actually be able to see, okay, does the level of you talking connect to your interaction in person? And he said, absolutely not. He was like, there are some people who I have amazing conversations with over text, and then in person, absolutely nothing, and vice versa, where we know next to nothing about each other, and then amazing connection in person. With this guy specifically, he is the person I've been on a date with who I've spoken to the least. We matched at 10 o'clock. We were on a date at 3 o'clock. I didn't even know his job. I didn't know he was Australian until he turned up on the date. And the first word he said to me, I went, oh, Australian. He was like, oh yeah, I landed this morning. No clue. Didn't know he didn't even live in this country. And yet I would say it's probably up there with one of my best dates. Similarly, the last day I went on, I was so exhausted. I had been stood up the day before. I was going through our texts and I was like, I know next to nothing about this guy either. Also didn't know a job, didn't know anything about him other than he'd also spent Christmas alone. That was the only information I knew about him. Because I'd been stood up the day before, I had sent a text 2 hours before being like, hey, are we still on? And he'd not replied. And then I'd sent another text an hour before being like, hey, if you're not interested, I'd rather you just let me know. And then it was kind of like this crunch time of trying to decide of like, do I go and potentially get stood up again, or do I not go and like maybe he just didn't get notifications? I don't personally get notifications on dating apps and he just hasn't seen the message. So I decided in that moment, I was like, I would rather be stood up again than be the person who stands him up. Turns out the reason why he hadn't replied was because he was cycling. And so he was cycling to our date location and he had then only texted when he was there and was like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. Thankfully, I decided to go. And again, that was one of my favorite dates and I knew nothing about him. So that is to say that the conversation you have over text before the first date doesn't necessarily translate it. Once you know the person, when you are reading the text, you are reading it in their tone of voice, so you have more information. But also, similarly with this guy, I said like, oh, you're one of those people who like I knew next to nothing about before going on this date. And he was like, I purposely do that. I've just been on dating apps way too long, and I've spent weeks before, sometimes 3 weeks, talking so much to a woman, and then within 5 minutes of the date I'm like, there's no vibe. And so I just don't do that anymore. Like, get on a first date, be on a first date, try to get drinking as soon as possible. And again, maybe the similarity between these two men is they were both in their 40s. And so I think having these conversations with people has just affirmed what I've always believed, which is it's fine if you're not excited about it. If you're not excited about the person, now that's something different. I hope that helps. Happy swiping, and just keep going until you get on that first date. The in-person interactions are the things that you have to value and prioritize more, and the things that you can be more selective around. So this Valentine's Day, I want you to prioritize yourself, and how you're going to do that is you're going to make time to spend time with yourself. This is something you've probably heard me say before, but if you are expecting yourself to only make time for alone time once you like yourself, you will never do it. Force yourself to be alone and do the small luxuries that you do for whenever you have friends over. So if you do the side lamp instead of the big main light when you have friends over, do that for yourself. If it's the difference between putting crisps in a bowl and eating it straight out the packet, do that. If you only order takeaway when friends come over, let yourself order a takeaway when you have a night in alone. If you only let yourself read once you've done all the things on your to-do list, let yourself read. Make it special for you. Light a candle if that's a thing you only reserve for guests. Like, I want you to actually plan it like a date for yourself. If there's something that's been on your to-do list that you have kept as something, as a barrier after, like, well, once I'm in a relationship, I remember I used to say this around the Sky Garden. I was like, once I'm in a relationship, I would love to go on a date with the Sky Garden. I went to the Sky Garden. Like, you can go and do those things. One of the stories that I've told previously is this story of a guy who cancelled, I think it was like a third date, and we were meant to go bouldering, and I was more gutted about not bouldering than the third date. And so I went bouldering, and turns out I hated it. That fear of heights suddenly kicked in, and it was the 4-year-olds going way past me up on this rock climbing wall, and I was like stuck at the bottom screaming and terrified. But I discovered it the hard way, and also I went and did it, and that's the point. So making time for yourself. I also think spend this Valentine's Day actually prioritizing what you love about yourself. Like, to fall in love with yourself and actually walk through the world knowing how much you bring to the table, how much you are a kind-hearted person who tries your best. And yes, you might not always get it right, but has good intentions at the core of it. That has to be enough. And if it's not enough, bolster it with all the things that other people have complimented you about, all the things you've likely pushed away as compliments, but actually take a moment to be like, no, actually, why would someone go out of their way to compliment me if it wasn't true? And why am I choosing not to believe it? Rather than actually looking at the fact that, like, most people don't say compliments, they think it and it doesn't come out their mouth. So if they've actually put the increased effort to say it out their mouth, the least I can do is appreciate it like a gift and say thank you and choose to believe it. I often say that when it comes to beliefs, it's not about what's true and false. It's about what's useful and not useful. It is useful to believe the positive things about yourself. What are the compliments that people are consistently saying about you? Make that what you think of yourself when you are describing yourself to other people, when you view yourself. Have those at the forefront of your mind. Why are we so quick to emphasize the insults? We never forget those. But are there compliments? The one compliment I will never forget is being told I was forever fascinating. It was on a second date. And I have held on to that of like, I'm an interesting person. And it seeped into my language because I found myself the other day saying like, well, if someone called me boring, I just wouldn't believe them because I've never been called boring in my life. Where do you think that started? It started with just believing one day that when someone said I was forever fascinating, I was like, okay, I'm forever fascinating. And now it's seeped into my language and my actual identity of myself and how my sense of self and how I see myself. And it's a good thing I believe I'm interesting because I talk to myself so often via cameras and in books. And a lot of my job is talking, that it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I think taking some time this year to prioritize that is one way you can really change the trajectory of not only your dating life, but also the self-esteem you walk through the world with. I also think if you really hate Valentine's Day and you hate the capitalist part of it, remove those elements from it. You can design Valentine's Day however you like. The same thing I said around Christmas Day. You get to choose it for yourself. You don't have to live according to how everyone else has defined it. And if you want to bury your head in the sand and pretend like it's not Valentine's Day, then you do you. I do hope you have a very nice day, though. I do hope you find a way to celebrate the love that is in your life, and even just pay attention to the platonic love, because it is just as valuable. And there are so many people who care about you, appreciate you, respect you, and love you. And don't neglect them just because you aren't coupled this year. I hope you have a wonderful time no matter what. And as we end every episode with something I am learning, what I am learning is you have to take someone's advice within the context of who they are as a person. So while I was going on so many dates in January, I sensed some judgment from the people in my life of like, this is too much. The word erratic was thrown out at one point. And then I started looking at, okay, how much have they dated for them to say that? And of course, to a person who hasn't been on a date in the last year, hasn't had sex in the last 2 years, in their mind, it will be erratic to go on 8 dates in a month. In my mind, it isn't, because I have the energy and I'm self-aware enough to know I have the capacity to. But in the same sense that if someone is shaming you for having too much sex or going on too many dates, it's usually coming from their upbringing and them being judged. And everything anyone says about you is actually what they're saying about themselves. And once you look at it from that point of view, it is so telling, it is so illuminating that actually the words and the name calling that is thrown in your direction is just never about you. And so when people were throwing words in this direction, what I found was the best way to retaliate, but not retaliate, is to actually ask a question like, what does that word mean to you? Why do you think it is too much? When you start asking questions, they start unpicking where their judgments come from, especially if it's coming from people who aren't malicious and actually love you. And like, maybe when they throw that word in your direction, it's coming from left field and kind of takes you off guard. Actually asking a question and unpicking where that frame of reference is coming from will not only help you understand why they're saying it, but also not take it so personally. So I hope that helps you, because it's the thing I'm currently learning. I don't always do it, but I'm just reminding yourself most of the time it's not about you. And yeah, this has been a lovely old chat and also just nice life update. So thank you so much for listening. And if you enjoyed this, leave us a review and I'll be back next Tuesday with a brand new rant.